Data and ideas to pursue change. Please welcome our panel, Emily Jashinsky of the Washington Examiner, formerly of the Youth Misery Index, Scott Moody, founder of the State Business Tax Climate Index, Brian Riley, Heritage Foundation, Index of Economic Freedom, and Dr. Wendy Warcholik, ACU Foundation co-director of Family Prosperity Initiative and Family Prosperity Index. Our moderator is Angela Flood of the ACU Foundation.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We're happy to have you here. As you heard, our topic this afternoon is how to use data and ideas to affect change. You may think this sounds a little wonky, a lot of economics, this might not be for me, but in fact it is for you, and let me tell you why. We're here to help you as you communicate with friends or in your workplace or wherever you may be to help advance conservative principles and ideas. And this is especially true, especially necessary now in the era of fake news, not knowing what you should believe. Data doesn't lie, and it's important to have that as the underpinning of the arguments that you're going to make, the theories, the ideas that you're going to put forward. And we're here to help you. We have several people here today who have tools that you can use. They're going to tell you where to find them, what they'll tell you, and you'll be able to use those as you communicate your ideas. First we have, at the end, we have Dr. Wendy Warcholik is a public choice economist trained in applied microeconomics and econometrics and has spent her career applying economic tools to the problems of state government. Wendy is currently a senior fellow at the American Conservative Union Foundation, where she and Scott Moody have created the Family Prosperity Index, which we'll talk about in a little bit. She is also a senior fellow at the Illinois Policy Institute and the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. She previously served as an adjunct scholar with the Tax Foundation, where she and Scott co-created the popular State Business Tax Climate Index, which is now in its 15th year of publication. She received her PhD in economics from George Mason University. Brian Riley is an advocate for economic freedom at the Heritage Foundation. He brings years of experience in trade and economic issues to his role as J. Van Andel Senior Analyst in Trade Policy. Working in Heritage's Center for Trade and Economics, Brian contributes to the Index of Economic Freedom, which he's going to talk about today. His work includes analyzing the trade and foreign investment policies of over 180 countries, and he has conducted extensive in-depth research on the impact trade has on people in the United States and around the world. Brian grew up in Kansas and holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Kansas State University and a master's degree in economics from the University of Southern California. Scott Moody has worked on, Emily Jashinsky is a commentary writer at the Washington Examiner, just keeping everyone on your toes, where she provides daily insights on politics, culture, and the next generation. Emily served previously as the spokeswoman for Young America's Foundation. Many of you here may be familiar with the group. That's right. Absolutely. The nation's largest conservative youth outreach group and the organization that preserves the Reagan Ranch. At YAF, Emily spearheaded media initiatives to push back against bias on college campuses. No small job there. Her work has been featured everywhere from the O'Reilly Factor to the Washington Post to Good Morning America. She's a regular guest on Fox News and Fox Business. And in 2016, Red Alert Politics named Emily to its 30 under 30 list of leading young conservatives. So we have a celebrity with us.
There it is. Yeah, go Bucky.
Originally from Waukesha, Wisconsin, Emily graduated magna cum laude from the George Washington University in 2015. Now, Scott Moody has worked as a public policy economist for 2 decades. He's the author, co-author, and editor of 180 studies and books. He's testified before congressional committees and state legislatures, and his work has appeared in numerous publications, including Forbes, CNN Money, and State Tax Notes. Scott was previously the CEO and chief economist of the Maine Heritage Policy Center, the state policy network-affiliated think tank in Maine. He's currently a senior fellow at the American Conservative Union Foundation, at the Illinois Policy Institute, and the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, and has previously served as a senior economist at the Heritage Foundation and the Tax Foundation, where he and Wendy created the State Business Tax Climate Index I mentioned. Scott received his master's in economics from George Mason University. So we have a lot of firepower up here, a lot of people with big brains who can talk to you about how to use information as you advance conservative ideals. So first, before we talk about the indexes and what we're measuring, I think we want to identify what exactly it is the goal is. So if we're talking about prosperity or freedom, in the case of the Student Misery Index, we want to talk about the opposite of misery. What is the goal of what we're doing here? So in the case of the Student Misery Index, Emily, what are we trying to, what's the purpose of the index?
Yeah, so what I love about CPAC is how many young people there are here. And you guys know, the media likes to say, you guys care about, you care about race, you care about gender. We poll you guys, and we know what you guys are most concerned about is your education, it is your financial prospects, and it is if you're going to get a job when you graduate, right? Is that accurate? You don't care about the other stuff. And so the Youth Misery Index, actually, that Young America's Foundation developed around 2009 and has been measuring every year since, is saying, how are young people being hurt where they care? Right? So what is happening to young people in the areas that they care about most, in the areas that actually really impact their futures? So that was the purpose of the Youth Misery Index, is to see, what is the state of young people in this country? We don't care about what the media is saying. We're going to get into the numbers and say, how are young people thriving or not thriving in America today?
Okay, great. Now, the Family Prosperity Index is, by its name, we want to see how prosperous families are doing in particular states. Wendy, how do we define prosperity for that purpose?
Well, we define prosperity, we look at a broad array of data, over 60 variables, and we define prosperity as both the culmination of what's happening on the economic side of our lives as well as the cultural, social side of our lives. And so our data covers both economic factors and social factors, because we know that what's happening on the social side has a very real impact on economic outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, how about internationally? Obviously, all of this has a global impact as well.
Well, I brought a copy of our 2017 index, which just came out this last week. And there are a couple of things that we try and do. The first is you can look and see how a country is doing at a moment in time. So you can look at the United States and see we're the 17th freest economy in the world.
17th.
17th, 1-7. We've dropped out of the top 10. But maybe more importantly, with our indexes, you can look at trends and see, are you getting better or getting worse? Mm-hmm. And so for the United States, for example, our score is the lowest that it's ever been. Our ranking is the lowest that it's ever been. So for some groups, that may be significant in and of itself, that we're losing economic freedom in the United States. But then the follow-up is, I don't care if you're conservative or liberal or what your outlook is. Most people want the same kinds of things, I believe. They want to have they want to have jobs when they graduate. They want to have their kids have opportunities. They want to have more security, better health care systems. And with the data we use, you can look and see that the countries that have the most economic freedom are the most prosperous. People live longer. There's less poverty. The environment is cleaner. So freedom and prosperity are two things that go hand in hand. That's a theory that a lot of people have, and the information that's in our index certainly shows that in practice that's how it works.
Mm-hmm. And just to circle back a little, to come full circle to what young people are particularly concerned about when it comes to jobs, the Tax Foundation State Business Tax Climate Index is something that would be of interest because it's going to assess how, what the tax climate is, how that will affect businesses and thus jobs in those states. Am I right?
Absolutely. As we know, taxes matter a lot to the economy. And the fundamental goal of the index is tax reform, putting in a good tax system. Of course, we heard from President Trump yesterday that tax reform is a major priority of his at the federal level. But we know a lot of what he does is going to take its cues from the states. The states are the laboratories of democracy. And so the index was created, number one, to rank the 50 states. Who has the best tax system in the country? Who has the worst? And of course, states can then emulate what works in other states. And that's a key criteria. Secondly, however, policymakers need guideposts to what are the principles, good principles of tax reform. And so the index is that map, if you will, for determining what makes good tax policy.
And you, I mentioned early on that you and Wendy also co-created the Family Prosperity Index, but that was sort of born out of the State Business Tax Climate Index. Is that right?
That's right. Our experience with the Business Tax Climate Index informed our the way we created the Family Prosperity Index. You know, we learned early on that rankings matter in public policy discussions. Nobody wants to be 50th. In the country, and that really motivates policymakers to want to make positive change for their citizens.
Mm-hmm. The Family Prosperity Index looks at 60 variables. The Student Misery Index looks at 3 of them.
Yeah, we look at 3 with the Youth Misery Index. We look at youth unemployment. We look at average graduating student loan debt, which does anybody know what that number is? It is $37,000. The average student is graduating with $37,000 of student loan debt. We also look at debt per capita, which is around $62,000. These numbers are kind of unbelievable, and we've seen obviously an enormous growth in those numbers over the course of the Obama administration. So those are the 3 variables that go into the Youth Misery Index. In 2009, it was around 84. Right now, the number is 113. It's gone up 30 points and 36% under the Obama administration. We're obviously hopeful that that will be changing very soon.
And Brian, what are some of the factors that you look at Heritage when you're putting together the Index of Economic Freedom?
We have 4 broad categories, and Scott mentioned states as laboratories of democracy. You can do something similar with countries, I think, countries as laboratories of democracy or laboratories of freedom. I don't know if everybody has looked at the photograph of the Korean Peninsula at night, where South Korea is all lit up, and then there's just a line when you hit North Korea, and there's nothing. And there's a reason, and it's one country is more free, and the other one has very limited freedom. We look at things like property rights, the rule of law. So many countries, either you can't legally own property, or technically you can, but they don't have a legal system that allows you to show that you have a deed to your house or your business. And if you don't have that and you want to sell your property, you can't do it. If you want to take out a loan from the bank and you can't prove that you have something as collateral, you're really stuck at the bottom rung of the ladder. Something that many Americans, I think, take for granted is the basic private property rights that we have here. We look at the size of government, spending, taxes. We look at regulations. The main reasons the U.S. has gone down is because, in our score, is government spending has been going up and regulatory burden has been going up. And then we look at international trade and investments. And around the world, the countries that are most prosperous are the ones that remove government barriers to the freedom to trade and invest with whoever you want to. Countries like Hong Kong and New Zealand and Australia and Canada, for example.
And what sources do you go to for this information?
So it's a broad range of sources. We don't, Heritage Foundation, we have a great staff, but we don't send people around the country to, around the world, I should say, to do the original research. We use data from the World Bank, for example, for tariff rates, the United Nations. There are survey data. the U.S. government, the State Department, Commerce Department have a lot of information. So what we've done at Heritage isn't so much the original research, but trying to take all the information that's out there and aggregate it in a way that people might find useful. The other thing that we've tried to do is make it as transparent as possible. So somebody says, well, I'm liberal and you're the Heritage Foundation, I don't trust you, or whatever the case may be. The information's all online at heritage.org/index, and you can see where we get the numbers from. And you can choose to agree or disagree. And then we encourage people as well to use the information to come up with their own conclusions and not just take our word for it.
And Wendy, the same is true for the Family Prosperity Index, too.
It is. Most of our data comes from credible government sources, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis, the CDC. Yeah, I mean, 98% of it is government data. And we look at, we have 6 major categories, but we look at variables. We look at very similar variables that Brian is talking about in our economics. We look at migration. Why are people leaving our state? We look at the money that's leaving the state. But we also look at demographics, the age structure of the state, which is very important. In the Northeast, for example, they're the most aging state. Whereas in states like Utah, they're projected to double their population in the next 10 years. So there's a wide variance in demographics, and that drives economic outcomes like your labor pool, your future labor pool. But we also look at welfare. We look at different measures of welfare and dependency. We look at illicit drug use. We look at sexually transmitted diseases. We look at family culture variables like religious attendance, incarceration, educational attainment. We really want to get a clear picture of how our communities are thriving. And we even get down to the local level, to the county level, so we can help employers, civic leaders, and legislators identify those hot spots within their state that they really need to focus on. So our goal is to help governors, legislators, civic leaders prioritize where they spend their time. An example of how stakeholders have been able to utilize our index. Where we live, up in the Northeast in New Hampshire, it's sort of in the presidential cycle, it made national news about the heroin crisis there. And because we have substance abuse in our index, we're able to talk about that in a data-driven way. And we know that there's a relationship between substance abuse and religious attendance, for example. In the Northeast, they have the least amount of religious attendance and the highest overdose rates. There's a strong correlation there between religion and substance abuse. We also have seen a 250% increase in sexually transmitted diseases, and we know that there's a strong correlation between STDs and substance abuse, for example. So we point out these relationships to people who are developing policy solutions to turn that around. So we help them prioritize where they spend their time and money so that they have a durable solution to work with. But it's also about educating people about what's ailing our communities, and to do that, we think you need sort of a much broader view beyond just looking at the economics. There's a whole other, sector of our lives that influence our economic outcomes in our lives.
And Scott, the index itself as a tool is useful for people across the spectrum to use in their advocacy and
well, the State Business Tax Climate Index is probably the most different from the other indexes in that it's pure statutory information. The tax code, of course, is a completely artificial creation by politicians, and of course one that many people would like to rip out by the roots. But in order to do that, however, you have to go into the law and you measure various aspects. How progressive is your tax code, for example? And we all know, the economic literature is clear, that a flat tax generates the most economic growth, and that's where the politicians have to get together and make the decision. How flat are we going to make the tax code? But you have to be able to measure that properly, and that's what that's the information the index provides to policymakers and grassroots activists when it comes time to modify your tax code.
Emily, how would you recommend that people use the index? What can students and young people just out of school do with that information?
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful tool, and I think this gets to the overall point of this panel, is how can you leverage this information to create change in the country? And so I think we see a lot of students use this as a powerful tool to take to their campuses to say, listen, we're hearing a lot about social issues. We're hearing a lot about popular culture in the media. We know what you care about. And where you care about your own interests is where you're hurting the most. So the Youth Misery Index is really a product of Young America's Foundation saying, look, we have all of these young people voting for Barack Obama, who's going to implement policies that will not benefit them. And that was the case. I mean, we measured that. That was the case over the course of the Obama administration. So how do you package that information in a way that is persuasive? And to be able to show the numbers and to have concrete data that says, this is how big government policies impacted your life, that's very powerful. And I do recommend students take that to their college campus. Put it on a giant poster. You know, show a chart. Charts get too much hate. Charts are actually very persuasive. If you just get on your campus, Young America's Foundation will help you every step of the way. Get it out there and show people what Obama's policies and what big government policies did to your peers. It's very powerful.
Great. Well, we have just a little under a minute left on the panel. What else should people know about our various indexes and information, where they can find this?
Well, I think it's just important to use these as facts to base to support the things that we all believe in so strongly. I don't know. Do we have any teachers here? I'm always interested when I have visitors from other countries, from governments. They complain that we're too hard on them and how great they're doing and how we need to improve their score. But if it's from the private sector, it's almost always the opposite, right? Things are so much harder than you realize they are. People are actually trying to get ahead. So I think these are all really important tools, not to sit on a bookshelf somewhere, but really to improve freedom in the United States and elsewhere.
Okay, we heard where to find all of these. FamilyProsperity.org is the Family Prosperity Index, business tax.
Taxfoundation.org.
And the Youth Misery Index.
YAF.org, YAF.org.
And Brian mentioned his too. So thank you all very much for being here. Thank our panel.